The signal was never meant for Earth. It was tagged as secure, urgent, and restricted to members of the Corwin Coalition. It was a plea for immediate assistance. Transmitted in narrowband deep space burst code, aimed at a fleet that should have been within range. But the calculations were off. A drifting gravitational eddy bent the signal off course by fractions of a degree. In interstellar distances, that was enough to miss its intended recipients by several light years and delivered directly into the reach of an obsolete human deep space listening array perched in the high desert of South America. The station crew had been listening to empty static for weeks, occasionally picking up pulsar data or the hiss of cosmic microwave background. The burst came at 3:14 a.m. local time, sudden and clear enough to register as a data anomaly. The junior operator on duty assumed it was interference until he looked at the compression pattern. Nothing in the human catalog matched it. The next 2 hours were a scramble to wake senior analysts, run decryption algorithms, and split the raw code into something the AI linguistics suite could process. Within 3 days, the first fragmented translations appeared. The content read like military distress. Mentions of enemy movement, sector coordinates, and casualty projections. The AI struggled with context. Verbs seemed to have hierarchies. Nouns shifted meaning depending on tone markers. But enough clarity emerged to understand requests. Urgent reinforcement needed. That was all the humans needed to make a decision. They didn't know who was speaking, what species they were, or what war they were fighting. But someone was asking for help. The official channels tried to contain it, bury it under classified clearance. But Earth's network of academic observatories and freelance signal chasers wasn't so easily silenced. Enough of the message leaked to rally a loose coalition of scientists, engineers, and, quietly, a few defense agencies. In a private meeting, someone asked a question that changed the course of events. If they can hear us now, why not answer? The first reply was clumsy, encoded in what the AI guessed was compatible syntax. It introduced humanity as an allied force responding to the distress call. The alien side replied within hours. Their syntax sharpened, their tone formal, their assumption clear. They believed they were speaking to another coalition fleet operating under radio silence. The humans, unsure how to correct the misunderstanding, let it stand. Over the next exchanges, the aliens described their situation in greater detail. A hostile faction known in their language as the Heshka was advancing through strategic corridor systems. The alien ship, the Kedith, was stranded after a mechanical failure crippled its faster-than-light drive. They had wounded, dwindling supplies, and intelligence indicating the enemy would intercept them within 10 days. The humans read the coordinates, checked the star charts, and saw nothing in their own exploration records. It was deep in uncharted space, unreachable with existing propulsion, unless they hitched a ride. Suggestions were passed back and forth. The aliens assumed they were speaking to a force capable of FTL transit. The humans, bound to sublight limitations, began offering alternative strategies, redirecting debris fields to mask their location, using calm silence windows to simulate fleet movement, creating false sensor echoes to confuse enemy scouts. The alien replies carried subtle notes of confusion, then reluctant approval. These were tactics outside coalition doctrine, more desperate, less elegant, but disturbingly viable. From the alien perspective aboard the Kedith, the voice on the comm was odd. It lacked the tonal signatures of any known coalition dialect, favored blunt phrasing over layered politeness, and often proposed maneuvers that skirted the edge of coalition regulations. The ship's commander, Varesh, assumed their allies were an outer rim detachment long isolated from Central Command, hardened by years of resource scarcity. That would explain the improvisational tone, the strange metaphors about long shots, and Hail Marys. The humans, meanwhile, debated internally how much to reveal. The Pentagon liaison argued for restraint. No disclosure of technological limits, no mention of Earth's location. The civilian scientists argued the opposite. If the Kedith truly needed help, honesty could prevent fatal misunderstandings. In the end, they compromised by continuing the deception of identity, but framing all advice within the truth of their capabilities. They couldn't appear in person, but they could guide the aliens through unconventional solutions. 3 days into the exchange, Varesh tested them. The Kedith had a damaged life support module leaking atmosphere into space. Coalition procedure was to seal off the section, right off the equipment, and conserve what resources remained. The humans instead proposed a crude repair. Vent the compartment, coat the breach in a polymer slurry, and use localized thermal expansion to bond material in place. The alien engineers balked. It was unrefined, risky, and structurally inelegant, but the humans insisted. Even providing chemical ratios and bonding times adapted from maritime repair techniques. The repair held. Varesh's engineering chief noted, not without grudging respect, that no coalition training program would have conceived of such a fix. As the days passed, the enemy's approach drew closer. Coalition reinforcements were delayed, and Varesh's confidence eroded. The humans began pushing bolder suggestions, repurposing the Kedatha's communications dish as a directional radiation emitter to fry incoming sensor drones, modifying escape pods into kinetic projectiles, and even using sections of hull plating as improvised decoys. Each idea broke some coalition protocol. Each idea worked. Then came the first direct threat. An enemy scout ship entered the system, running active scans. Varesh sent an encrypted update, expecting the humans to advise a stealth approach. Instead, they proposed something far more aggressive. Lure the scout into range of a dormant asteroid mining laser, bait them with false engine emissions, and cut their hull before they could transmit. It was brutal but efficient. The Kedath executed the maneuver, and the enemy vessel was destroyed in under 30 seconds. The humans' congratulatory message carried a tone that unsettled the alien crew. It was casual, almost conversational, as though destroying enemy craft was an unremarkable event. By now, Varesh's suspicion had crystallized into certainty. Whoever these allies were, they were not coalition standard. The final proof came when he requested a fleet identification code for authentication. The humans sent back a code that didn't match any coalition registry. When Varesh confronted them, the reply was simple. They were not coalition, not even known to the Galactic community. They had intercepted the distress call by chance, and they had chosen to answer. For a long moment, Varesh considered cutting contact. Coalition law discouraged entanglement with unregistered civilizations. But the situation was too dire, and the humans' guidance had already kept his crew alive longer than expected. When he asked why they would risk themselves for strangers, the human voice on the comm said without hesitation, because someone needed help. Varesh didn't sleep after the humans revealed the truth. It wasn't fear of them. It was the weight of what their presence meant. Every coalition commander was trained to assess risk, and dealing with an unknown species in wartime was pure volatility. Yet volatility had kept them alive this far. He replayed their voice, direct and formal, unshaken by the idea of taking the fight to the Heshka. They had no obligation, no treaty, no political leash. They were here entirely by choice. That, he realized, made them dangerous in ways the Heshka would not anticipate. When the next transmission came, it wasn't advice, it was a request. The humans wanted detailed schematics of the Kedath, its remaining armaments, and the energy budget for every subsystem. Coalition doctrine would never allow such disclosure to an unregistered contact, but the alternative was waiting for the Heshka to arrive and tear them apart. Varesh sent the files. The reply came back in under an hour, annotated with modifications so unconventional his engineers thought it was a joke. They began tearing down non-essential systems, hydroponics, recreation modules, redundant power routing, stripping them for parts to reinforce structural weak points, and reroute shielding to the most probable points of impact. It was brutal triage. The humans didn't seem to understand the discomfort this caused among the crew, or perhaps they didn't care. When one officer protested that removing habitat modules would demoralize the injured, the human voice simply said, "Dead crew don't need morale." The first test of these modifications came sooner than expected. 2 Heshka Outrider ships entered the system, sweeping for the Kedath. Coalition doctrine dictated evasion until reinforcements arrived. The humans dismissed this as suicide. They suggested using one ship's heat signature as bait, projecting it through a network of sensor buoys reprogrammed to drift in erratic orbits, forcing the Outriders to chase phantoms until they were isolated. Then the Kedath would strike with concentrated fire before retreating behind its improvised minefield. The alien crew argued the risks. The The humans reminded them they had nothing to lose but the battle itself. The trap worked. One outrider was lured into range and shredded in the first salvo. The second fled without attempting rescue. Varesh listened to the crew's hushed conversations afterward. The shock wasn't the victory. It was at how ruthlessly it had been achieved. There was no celebration, no ceremony, just the efficient disposal of an enemy. In the next transmission, the humans began to explain something they called depth of engagement. In human war history, they said there were no rules that guaranteed survival. Battles were won by forcing the enemy to fight on ground they didn't understand. The Keteth was now that ground. They would force the Heshka to come to them, through fields of wreckage and false signals, into weapons fire they couldn't predict. Varesh's tactical officers took notes as if they were hearing the rules of war rewritten. The cultural differences were sharper in quieter moments. Coalition species value consensus before action. Humans seem to thrive on rapid, unilateral decisions. Coalition commanders feared unpredictable losses. Humans viewed unpredictability as a weapon. And where coalition forces measured success in territory secured or assets preserved, humans spoke only in terms of the enemy's inability to fight back. The Keteth's engineers began integrating human-inspired modifications into shipboard operations. Cooling systems were rerouted to allow short bursts of overpowered weapons fire. Cargo drones were stripped and rebuilt into remotely piloted assault pods. Even the waste recycling units were repurposed to produce chemical compounds that could corrode enemy hull alloys. The ship was becoming something Varesh barely recognized. Less a coalition vessel and more a hybrid machine of calculated desperation. Then the Heshka fleet signaled their intent. A wide-band pulse swept the system, likely an intimidation tactic. The humans intercepted it, decoded the basic structure, and sent back a reply designed not to communicate but to confuse. Garbled data packets, contradictory coordinate markers, and bursts of white noise shaped like false fleet movements. It was psychological warfare at a level the Keteth's crew had never employed. Varesh noticed the crew speaking of the humans with a mix of awe and unease, as though they were allies but also something alien in their own right. The real test came with the arrival of a Heshka vanguard, a squadron of 6 ships meant to probe defenses. The humans outlined engagement in 3 phases: scatter their formation, cripple their fastest ship, then withdraw to lure them deeper. It was reckless, but the Keteth executed it with precision. The enemy lost 2 ships outright, and a third limped away trailing debris. The Keteth took damage, but the humans had anticipated the vectors and reinforced those sections. Repairs began before the smoke had cleared. Afterward, Varesh found himself speaking to the human liaison without formality. He asked why they pushed so hard, why they treated every engagement as an opportunity to strike rather than survive. The answer came without hesitation. Because if they think you're just trying to survive, they'll push until you can't. Make them believe you're trying to kill them, and they'll think twice. The crew began adopting human terms. Kill zone, misdirection play, shock window. Younger officers started studying archived human military history between shifts, fascinated by conflicts fought on a single planet that rivaled multi-system wars in brutality and ingenuity. There was no romance in the human accounts, only raw efficiency. Varesh realized that, for humans, war was not a failure of diplomacy but an expected outcome of existence. Days later, the humans proposed their boldest plan yet. They wanted to take one of the Keteth's smaller cargo shuttles, strip it of shielding, overload its reactor, and use it as a controlled detonation device against the Heshka's lead cruiser. The detonation would be masked by an asteroid collision, making it appear as an environmental hazard rather than a deliberate strike. Coalition law forbade using crewed vessels as weapons. The humans countered that it wouldn't be crewed. It would be piloted remotely. Engineering worked without rest to modify the shuttle. The humans provided targeting algorithms capable of predicting the cruiser's evasive patterns within milliseconds. When the moment came, the shuttle's reactor went critical exactly in the path of the cruiser's maneuver. The explosion gutted the vessel, sending shockwaves through the Heshka formation. The enemy broke off the pursuit, regrouping at a distance. For the first time, they were hesitating. Varesh knew the pattern. The humans had shifted the balance. The Heshka no longer saw the Keteth as prey. They saw it as a threat. That hesitation was worth more than any reinforcements could bring. Yet the humans weren't satisfied. They pushed for continued harassment, hit-and-run strikes, false comms chatter suggesting multiple coalition fleets, targeted destruction of sensor buoys. They understood something the coalition didn't. Fear was a resource, and it could be cultivated. The Heshka returned in force. No outriders, no probes, no testing maneuvers. Just a full weight of their strike group dropping into the system on overlapping vectors. It was a kind of formation designed to crush resistance in minutes, the kind of overcommitment that signaled confidence in total victory. The Ketheth was still alone. Coalition reinforcements remained days away, and even if they made full speed, the battle would be over before they crossed the midpoint. Varesh did not ask the humans for reassurance. He simply sent the data. They replied with a single line, "Then we make them bleed first." There was no speech to the crew, no rallying call. Orders moved silently through the decks. The minefields were armed, the debris corridors aligned, the improvised assault pods loaded. The crew no longer questioned the humans' methods. They implemented them. Every movement aboard the Ketheth was purposeful, stripped of ceremony. Even the injured who could stand found themselves manning auxiliary stations. The Heshka opened with a saturation volley meant to overwhelm shields and sensors in the first minutes. The Kethetha's shields buckled but held long enough for the humans' first deception to unfold. A false energy signature, mimicking a second ship, appeared on the enemy's flank. As 3 Heshka vessels peeled off to intercept, they flew directly into a dense cloud of reflective chaff, seeded with micromines. 2 detonations bloomed white in the void, scattering wreckage into the path of a third ship. The Ketheth fired once into its crippled hull and moved on. The enemy regrouped, closing ranks, and advanced in a tighter spearhead. That was the humans' cue to unleash the second phase. Cargo drones, painted in the Kethetha's identification codes, launched in a broad arc, broadcasting encrypted coalition signals. The Heshka targeted them as priority threats, wasting ordnance on empty metal shells. Each destroyed drone vented corrosive compounds into space, clinging to hull plating and eating through outer armor. The Kethetha's gunners didn't waste the opportunity. Every weakened section became a target. Varesh watched the enemy's advance falter. Not stop, not break. But hesitation was creeping in. The humans had warned him this was a turning point to seize. A battle could be lost in seconds if that hesitation hardened into caution. So they proposed a maneuver he'd refused in earlier battles. The Ketheth would charge. It was madness. Charging into the center of a formation designed to concentrate fire was suicide. But the humans' reasoning was simple. The enemy expected retreat. A sudden advance would overload their targeting algorithms, force them to split focus and risk friendly fire in their own ranks. The Kethetha's surviving assault pods would be launched at point-blank range, turning the enemy's density against them. The first seconds of the charge were pure violence. Shields burned away under concentrated fire, armor screamed under impact, and 3 decks reported decompression. But the Kethetha's forward batteries tore into the lead Heshka ship, punching through its weakened plating from earlier corrosive strikes. It split apart under internal detonations, scattering molten fragments across its neighbors. The assault pods launched on short burns, slamming into enemy hulls and detonating shaped charges that ripped through vital systems. The formation shattered. Ships broke off to evade, creating gaps the Ketheth exploited to slip through and circle back. The humans had called it cutting the head off the snake, though Varesh had never seen a snake. What he saw was the Heshka's command structure unraveling in real time. Coordinated volleys devolved into isolated exchanges, defensive screens faltered, and targeting discipline dissolved. But victory was far from certain. The Ketheth had burned through half its munitions and most of its shielding. Damage control was fighting fires on 3 decks. The enemy still outnumbered them, and any one of the remaining cruisers could cripple them with a lucky salvo. That was when the humans introduced their last card. From the earliest transmissions, they had been collecting every scrap of sensor data the Ketheth could provide: ship silhouettes, engine signatures, firing patterns. They had built, in parallel, a profile of the Heshka fleet's command AI. With that, they crafted a single false transmission in Heshka battle code, an emergency retreat order. It wasn't meant to fool every ship. It was meant to reach just enough captains to fracture unity. The message went out on a tight beam burst from one of the Kedatha's comm drones, timed to coincide with another deceptive energy spike in the enemy rear guard. Two ships broke formation almost immediately, burning hard for the system's edge. Others wavered, adjusting headings without orders. Varesh seized the opening, ordering concentrated fire on the remaining command cruiser. The humans guided targeting, adjusting every half-second to compensate for enemy evasive drift. A final volley breached the cruiser's core, and the detonation lit the void. The psychological collapse was instant. Ships turned away in staggered retreat, some firing covering shots, others abandoning discipline entirely. The Kedat did not pursue. The humans had warned that overextension could invite disaster. Instead, they held position, letting the minefields and debris take their toll on the fleeing ships. In minutes, the system was empty but for wreckage and the silent glow of dying reactors. The crew stood in stunned quiet. They had not merely survived. They had broken a superior force. No coalition fleet had managed such a reversal against the Heshka in open battle for years. Varesh sent the humans a final tactical report, though it felt hollow compared to what he wanted to say. Their reply was simple. You made them run. They'll remember that. Word spread faster than official channels could contain it. Other coalition captains began requesting fragments of the Kedatha's battle telemetry. None could understand how a single damaged ship had turned back a strike group without reinforcements. The official report omitted the humans entirely. Varesh did not correct it. Not yet. Later, in a private transmission, Varesh asked the humans why they had stopped pushing once the enemy retreated. Their answer was telling. Because you don't kill an enemy you want to keep afraid. You just make sure they know what you can do. It was not cruelty, but strategy. Leave the Heshka with the memory of this day, so it would color every future engagement. When Coalition Command finally made contact, Varesh submitted a heavily edited account of events. The humans' role was reduced to unorthodox Allied consultation. Command approved a commendation for ingenuity under duress. But Varesh kept the unedited logs encrypted for himself as proof of the day the galaxy shifted. In their final exchange before breaking contact, Varesh asked a question that had lingered since the first reply. Why did you really answer? The human voice was calm, unadorned, because if we ever call, we'd want someone to answer too. Then the channel went dead. For days afterward, Varesh found his crew using human idioms without noticing. Phrases about long odds, pushing the line, and making it hurt peppered their speech. The engineers continued refining the modifications, keeping the Kedath in its altered state. They were no longer simply a coalition vessel. They were something more dangerous, something unpredictable.